Well, Winnipeg is generally an English-speaking mission. There is one area of the mission, a city called Brandon, Manitoba, that if you're called there, you might speak a little Spanish because there's a lot of migrant workers from South America who work over at the food plant there. It's actually one of the biggest geographic missions in North America. It covers from the western half of Ontario to all of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So it's long, and transfers can be very long. I remember one transfer. I was serving in an area in the western half of the mission, and I got called to that most southeasterly part of the mission you could get called to. So transfers took me literally about 12 hours to drive. So yeah. If you're getting called here, expect for long road trips, unless of course you're called to the actual city and serve there your entire mission. But most likely you'll have at least 1 or 2 road trips while you're serving in the mission. Canadians aren't honestly all that different from Americans. Most of them live literally only about 100 miles away from the border, so the American influence is pretty strong. There are some unique factors to Canadian lifestyle that make Canada different. The money is, if you get changes in dollars, you'll most likely, if it's a $1 bill, you won't see those. You'll most likely see $1 coins known as loonies. Besides that, the $5, $10, $20, $100 bills are all multicolored. So, yeah, it's kind of funny. It feels like Monopoly money, but it's cool. Of course, as a lot of people know, Canada does have a more socialized healthcare system. So if you go to a doctor, it'll be pretty affordable just because it's taxpayer funded, basically. But really, there's not a whole lot of differences between Americans and Canadians in regards to attitudes, really. It's pretty much very similar in both countries. I do know the church, one of the first foreign missions that opened early on in the church's history was Canada. Joseph Smith and other church leaders would go up to Toronto every once in a while and teach people. Some of the first converts we know of actually came from Canada. So it's pretty cool. Besides that, it's an independent country since like the 1860s, I believe. And don't quote me on that. It's very multicultural. You've got people from all different walks of life there. Actually, Winnipeg in particular has probably the biggest amount of Filipinos per capita outside of the Philippines. So, prepared to enjoy a lot of Filipino culture depending on where you serve in Winnipeg. Most of the wards have a good heavy Filipino presence in each of the wards. Most of them speak very good English, so you won't have to worry about speaking a whole lot of Tagalog or anything like that. Food-wise, they'll treat you to a lot of their local delicacies, including, if you're brave enough, you'll have balut, which is basically an egg with a duck embryo in it. I've had it once, not my sort of type of cuisine I really like, but it's a great experience. They're very friendly, happy people. A lot of them are open to the missionaries enough to at least let you in and teach them, although many of them are very heavily Catholic. So the church is not predominantly strong in most of Canada, unless, of course, you're lucky and you serve in Alberta. Alberta has a major LDS population, particularly in the south, because of Mormon pioneers who colonized Cardston, Alberta, back in like the early 1900s. Besides that, in most regions of Canada, the church isn't that strong. In Winnipeg, it encompasses about I think like 0.1 of the 0.1% of the population. There's only like literally 6 wards in the entire city. Yeah, and the same thing over in Saskatchewan and Alberta. I mean, not Alberta, and Ontario. There is one temple in Regina and another one coming along the way in Winnipeg. If you're lucky, you'll probably be able to you'll probably be able to see the groundbreaking. In regards to historical areas, I know over in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, there are tunnels that Al Capone back in the day would hide a lot of his liquor in. They're open to the public now, and I haven't actually been there myself, but I hear they're very interesting. If you want a great place that's very scenic, there is this town called Kenora in Ontario. There, it's unlike most of the mission. It's very hilly. And has lots of lakes and rivers. It's great for fishing, and I hear it's a very lovely place. I've been there a couple of times myself, and I love it every single time I've been. Winnipeg is known as the Chicago of the North. It's probably one of the windiest cities in Canada, and actually the most major intersection in the city, Portage in Maine, is considered one of the windiest intersections in the world. Besides that, winter gets quite cold. 30 or 40 below is pretty common. Summer times, it's pretty normal summer, 90 to 100 degree temperatures. So you get a variety of different climates. Depending on the time of year, it can be pretty muggy. The mission is set predominantly in the plains. There's really no mountains you'll see anywhere, so I don't know. It's pretty fun. Actually, in my first area in Minnesota, I actually saw a lot of white-tailed deer. It's funny. Where we lived, there was a little clearing outside our window, and every morning we would see some white-tailed deer just wander around the clearing and eat whatever people left there, and it's pretty fun. You'll occasionally see them also wandering in Winnipeg. If you're in Kenora, you'll see a lot of deer there. It's funny, you'll see them walking even down the city streets. They're known as the Kenora deer. Besides that, there are moose, depending on where you serve, particularly in the easternmost city of the mission, known as Dryden. And then other than that, there's some small wildlife also, like squirrels and different types of birds and stuff. It's pretty neat. But as for Winnipeg, really the dangerous areas of the mission are what's known as the North End. It is the area just directly north of downtown, past the railroad tracks, up till the edge of the city. And it's mainly the north central region. The northwest region and the northeast regions are actually both very lovely. But this certain region, there's a lot of, like I said, predominantly it's gang problems. There's a lot of Native American gangs. A lot of the natives there have major problems with smoking and drinking and drugs. And I found out as a missionary teaching people in that area, that was one of the hardest things that people gave up. There were some there were some exceptions to that rule, though. I baptized a pair of twins, actually, who, before we started teaching them, realized that they needed to stop smoking weed. And these guys were super faithful followers of Jesus Christ, and so they really took a 180. But generally, when you're trying to teach someone in that section of the region, those major drug problems will be a big issue try and resolve. Just as a rule of safety when you're tracking in that region, just try not to track there when it's dark. Like, I remember me and my companion were, every time when it gets pretty dark in that area, you see a lot more drug deals go down. You see littered around Main Street a lot of prostitutes, even in the coldest, which in the summer it's pretty easy to tell, but in the winter, you know, it's very hard to tell because since it's so cold, everyone is dressed up anyways. So just try to be careful not to hit that region when it's really dark out. Other than that, a lot of the other regions of the city are very nice, very suburban sort of areas, and you shouldn't really have a whole lot of issues, just as long as you're very careful from the north end of the city. There are two types of foods in particular that come to mind when I think of Canadian food. One is known as poutine. Now it's basically what it is. It's, picture you have French fries, but then you put gravy on it and put cheese on it, and sometimes there's a lot of other things like bacon and so on and so forth. It's really good. It's not good for you, but a lot of Canadians love it. The other one is known as pierogies. It's actually a Ukrainian type of food. It's essentially, picture a ravioli. It's kind of similar to that. It's a piece of dough that has essentially mashed potatoes put in it, and a lot of times you can find it in the frozen goods aisle. You can just take it out, pop some in a pot with boiling water, boil it, fry them, take only like 5 or 10 minutes to cook. They're really good, they're very easy to make, and especially if you can try and get homemade ones, they're really good. Because it's so multicultural, you'll have the opportunity to have different types of food. Like I've already told you, Filipino food. I've had a lot of I had Mexican food. There was a man in one of the wards I served in who literally lived in Mexico about 20 years ago. You'll have Ukrainian food. There's a whole lot of different foods. I couldn't even begin to tell you all about them, honestly, because they're all so good. I know one big difference is grocery prices. If you serve in the Canada Winnipeg Mission, unless you're lucky and you serve in the few American areas there are, you'll have to pay a good chunk of money to get your groceries. For instance, if you want a block of cheese, be prepared to shell $9 for it. I think the biggest thing a lot of people associate Canada with is hockey. Hockey and curling are the two biggest sports in Canada, even over football. Fortunately, I served in Winnipeg, and they have an NHL team, the Winnipeg Jets. And literally, in order to get tickets to there, some people have to pay at least $100. So it's a huge deal. And there's curling rinks all over the place. In every town I've served in Canada, there is at least one curling rink. If you haven't watched like the Winter Olympics, it's essentially so a person, how to describe it? So you've got this rock that a person pushes, and then people sweep the ice in order to have it gain friction and, well, to reduce friction and hit the target. It's kind of like, how to describe it? It's kind of like shuffleboard on ice. Essentially, every first Monday of every month, you have a holiday. And so some of those holidays are honestly just days off, while others of them are of some import. They're particularly the holidays that are different in Canada. There is Remembrance Day, which is very similar to Patriots Day. in the States, where Canadians remember the people who have died in war. Particularly, it started as a way to remember those who died in World War I and World War II. And one of the ways they honor them is that they wear poppy on their lapel. That's the biggest one. You have Canada Day, which is July 1st. That, again, essentially it's similar to the 4th of July, except it commemorates the day when Canada first was established as a nation. And then on top of that, I mean, there are other days. Like, I think a lot of people have heard of Boxing Day, which honestly, partially because I served in the United States during both years, I don't know a whole lot about it. But I hear a lot of people use that for regifting, selling back goods, taking their bad presents back to the stores. Other of them kind of use it similar to like a Black Friday sort of thing to buy goods after Christmas. Well, yeah, like A is probably the most famous Canadianism people know about. Essentially, I've heard it called by one companion who was from Canada. It's basically a verbal question mark. So you don't just say A at the end of every sentence, but if you're asking a question like, how's your day going? A? That's pretty common. Other Canadianisms a lot of times you'll see bathroom addressed as washroom, which is a little bit different but easy to catch once you serve there long enough. There are also a lot of pronunciations that are different. For instance, if you're going to get a bag at a grocery store, they'll call it a grocery bag, or or progress. If you're talking about the progress of an investigator, a lot of people say the progress. I know there's some silly quirks about Canada, and if you're serving in Minnesota, occasionally you'll hear the oot and the boot sort of dialect, the more stereotypical Canadian that you hear on TV and stuff. In my first area, at that border town between the United States and Canada, most of the time there, it was a very slow area. We every once in a while found investigators to teach, but really they didn't progress and so on. So it was kind of annoying for us. But then one day we tracked it into this man by the name of Robert. We contacted him actually using a survey that our mission president developed at the time, which talked about prayer and people's experiences of prayer. And as we were talking to him about it, he told us a really great story about how back when he was in his 20s, he prayed to have his alcoholism taken away from him. And like immediately overnight, it was taken away. And so from there, he spent the next 30 years trying to find the true church. He had been to many different types of churches. His wife and his kids are Catholic, but he never felt comfortable there. And so when we first taught him the gospel, he was willing to open up. I remember one time he mentioned that as he was reading about Joseph Smith's story, that he felt a lot like Joseph Smith. That he'd known that God existed through what he's been through in his life, but he hadn't as of yet found the true church, and he knew that there had to be a true church. And as he was praying and reading and went to church, it was literally within a month that we began teaching him, and then he was baptized. What's crazy is now he's the branch president of the little branch I served over there. It only has 6 members in it, so it's definitely kind of crazy. But by what I've heard from missionaries that I've talked to recently, he's doing phenomenal. As for a more crazy type of story, one of the first areas I've served in when I served in Winnipeg was a city known as Gateway. It's the northern area of the city. This is also the more ghetto area. It's where a lot of crimes happen and a lot of bad things happen, and people avoid going into there if they can. Well, I remember one time me and my companion were driving to go tracting in one of the areas of this region, and we stopped for a second, and this lady waved at us and we waved back, you know, trying to be very polite about it. Turns out she was a prostitute. And so me and my companion, and so when she approached the car door to open it up, my companion hit the gas and we booked it out of there as fast as we could. That was crazy, but I don't know. There are a lot of stories. Let me think of one more. In my last area I served in, which was also in Winnipeg, we were tracting. This was a walking area, and as we were going back from the church to our apartment, it started pouring. Like, literally buckets of water were falling on us, and we hadn't been prepared. It was nice and clear when we first got out, so we're like, okay, whatever, we won't bring a coat. And so just picture us, we were just dressed in our suits and ties and getting drenched. And then while we were doing that, this one guy, random guy, decided to pull over. He asked us to go into his car. It was fortunate because we actually had an appointment we had to go to, and he was going down that area. And as we were talking, we were beginning to teach him about the gospel. It didn't really work out that well, but he did give us his contact info. So it was pretty neat. In regards to advice, I mean, there's a lot of things. You need, of course, to be spiritually prepared, read the scriptures, get familiarized to preach my gospel. But I think one of the things that a lot of missionaries, including myself, lack is the ability to have fun in the mission. I know there's at times, especially because missionary work in the mission is kind of slow, that a lot of people, you know, tracked. And as they're tracting, they get really down in the dumps. Partially because, I mean, let's be honest, tracting in 32 below weather for 6 or 8 hours is not the most enjoyable experience. And if nobody's willing to open up their doors, it makes it even less. However, there's more to missionary work than tracting. Actually, if you do serve in the Canada Winnipeg Mission, your current mission president, President Kirk Thomas, is a big believer that there's more than one way to find. I know this because during the end of my mission, I've been able to experience different ways of finding. I was able to, of course, track. I was able to go bus contacting, talking to people on the bus about their personal experiences and trying to connect that to the gospel. There's, of course, street contacting. There's family history. If you serve in Canada, if you serve in Winnipeg, the Stake Center has a family history center available, so it would be great to familiarize yourself. And then there's also a lot of other things you can do. There's game nights. There's firesides and different activities that you can have fun in planning and doing. And as long as you make sure to promote that to others in as many ways as possible, through tracting, through trying to contact people via the radio, and so on and so forth, you'll have a lot of success. I know in one of the areas I served in was it was about a town of 3,000 called Roseau in Minnesota. The branch had established a basketball night where every week members of the congregation would go to the local high school and play basketball and invite their friends. This was a great opportunity for us to obviously have fun and get to know the members, but also to be able to get to know their friends and be able to try and connect to them so that when we do talk to others about the gospel, they'll be able to have an enjoyable time. I know honestly that the mission is the best 2 years of your life, as long as you apply yourself and sacrifice everything you can. It's going to be a sacrifice. For me, when I served the mission, I only have been a member for about 2 years, and the only member of my family, to be exact. And during that time, it was kind of hard. I remember one moment, me and my dad were contending over email. He's a faithful evangelical Christian, and I'm obviously a faithful LDS member, and there were points where we disagreed, and it got to the point where it was very contentious. But after praying and after trying to, be peaceable with my dad, eventually our relationship worked out. And that happens not only in that regard, but in many different regards. You'll find yourself maybe in an area where you do have to tract. And after weeks and weeks in tracting, you might find someone like Robert in International Falls, who has been prepared by the Lord. But as you sacrifice your will to do the will of the Lord, you'll be able to have a great experience in your mission. And as you learn to have fun in your mission and try different approaches to finding people to teach, you'll be able to find more than what you would by just knocking on doors day after day. Elder or sister, if you are lucky and you're called to the Canada Winnipeg Mission, consider it a blessing. This is the best mission in the world for a reason. You'll be able to meet lots of great people. There's a lot of great areas you'll be able to serve in. And honestly, even the people who aren't members are awesome. Just remember that as you continue to work day after day, and always rely upon the Lord for help.